Well, thank you folks for coming. My name is Joe Kelley. I was a National Park Ranger for 30 years. I think I'm busier now than I ever was when I was working. You folks that are retired know what I'm talking about. But now the name of this program is Ranger Work in the 1960s in the Great Smokies. And that's what I'm going to try to talk about. The first day I did a program in Wednesday, I made it a general thing for the entire National Park Service. I didn't limit the Smokies, but I wanted to mention some things we had done in other parks. And I may repeat some of those, so forgive me if you were in that session. Forgive me if I repeat those. But what I'll be talking about are the way we did ranger work in the 1960s. And the name of the districts and sub-districts at that time will be what I'll be using. So today you may know a little more about how it's managed now than I do. But so be it. Now, we lived, over 30 years, we lived in probably 30 different locations. Those of you that are military will understand about getting moved around a lot. Come in, Joey. We'll welcome you folks. This is another part of my Amen Corner, or the mourner's bench, whichever you want to call it. Now, back then, there were 3 districts on the Tennessee side of the park in the Smokies, and 3 districts on the North Carolina side. And the easternmost one in the Smokies was Big Creek. I'm sorry, that was in North Carolina. Tennessee had Cosby, Little River, and Cage Cove. That was the 3 Tennessee districts. The Carolina side, it was Big Creek / Cataloochee, which I was part of. And then the South District, which was Cherokee and Straight Fork, and then the lake, Fontana. And we lived in every one of those districts other than Fontana. They never assigned me to Fontana. I think it's because I didn't know anything about boats. And trust me, I don't, because I had an assignment in Everglades, and I'll tell you, I'm not a sailor, because that's what you do down there primarily. I was telling Kevin earlier that about the Everglades, you have a 14-foot boat, a 7-foot Ranger, and 8-foot seas, and there's something wrong with the physics of that. No, but let's get back to the Great Smokies. Big Creek Ranger Station. Like I mentioned, you had 1 district and 1 ranger. And whatever happened in that district was up to you. It could be a plane crash, or it could be a wildflower talk to just a group of people, and everything in between. And there was a campground. Back in that time at Big Creek, it was a primitive campground, which meant tents only. And there was quite a number of, well, it was probably 600 miles of fishing streams, and maybe 200 or 300 miles of trail. And in my time, I'm thinking I walked for maybe almost 10,000 miles, most of them trying to get around this place. No, not at all, no. But that was probably what you did in Big Creek. I had a 63 Chevrolet pickup with steering shift on the column, and many of the time I could drive it home on the starter motor. If it broke down, the starter motor would take it to the top of the hill, then you could coast the rest of the way. So I don't think that's possible anymore. But now that was, I'm glad I did it, but it was tough. Now the way the Park Service did business in those days, well, first of all, they sent me, one morning I came to headquarters. I had received my summer uniform, which is short sleeve shirts, Stetson, and the pants and shirt. But I did not know that you didn't wear the tie at that time, so I had my tie on the short sleeve shirt, and that was for wintertime. That was for your wintertime uniform. But I didn't know how to put that thing on. So I say in my book I hope to write that I didn't know how to even put on the Park Service tie. Well, the truck was loaded with furniture. The truck they told me to go drive was loaded with furniture, everything from a chair for the office down to a pair of climbing rigs that you had to use to change the phone lines that went to the fire towers, and a Colt pistol about that long that I never had to use that, thank God. But now those climbing things I used a lot, because one of our big jobs then was to keep there were these old phone lines that went from the fire tower to the ranger station. That's basically the only place they went, except at headquarters there were one or two that went maybe to Gatlinburg, where they could call and get an ambulance or something like that. But remember, there was no 911, there were no cell phones, and everything was dependent upon word of mouth. If somebody got hurt, either a hiker or a motorist had to go tell somebody about it. Now, what I wanted to make sure I mentioned in this particular presentation is the fire tower operations. Back then, we had 14 fire towers in this park, and not all of them were staffed, but I'm going to tell you about the ones that were staffed and the names of the people that staffed them. Charlie Maynard, did you make it? Are you here today? Okay. He has a presentation on the fire towers and when they were built. Most of them built by the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, and one or two built otherwise, one or two that were inherited from other operations. But most of them were steel structures, as you've seen. They were like 100 feet up, except for, who can name the one that was not a steel structure? Mount Camera, right. Looked like a lighthouse. Beautiful place. If you ever get to hike to Mount Camera, you need to do it. I think there are volunteers that keep that up and repair it. Has a walkway all the way around it and a second level down below it. But let me just mention, I was going to have Charlie correct me if he were here, but I'm going to tell you where the fire towers were. You might recognize some of them. And then I'll come back and name the people that staffed them. Let's go on the far western end, on the Foothills Parkway that goes between Walland and Fontana, or Little Tennessee River. And that would have been Look Rock, 2 words, Look Rock Fire Tower. That picnic area is probably my favorite in the whole park, and it's closed now for the season. But Look Rock, coming around from that way, coming east over Cage Cove, was Rich Mountain Fire Tower. Then it came on to the one close to park headquarters called Cove Mountain. All right, went on from there to Greenbrier and Greenbrier Pinnacle, which in that time did not have a Jeep trail going to it. You could take the Jeep to within 1.5 miles, but you had to walk the rest of the way, which meant carrying a lot of supplies. I'll mention more about that in a moment. And then Mount Camera, which was right on the Appalachian Trail and on the state line, as it were, North Carolina, Tennessee. Continue on around into North Carolina, and you had Mount Sterling. Mount Sterling. Now, inside the Cherokee Indian Reservation was one called Fry, F-R-Y-E, Fry Mountain. That was in the Cherokee Nation, but the park paid for the lookout to be there. So that person was a staff member of the Great Smokies, Fry Mountain. And then coming on around, there were 2 fire towers over the lake, over Fontana Lake. There were High Rocks, which is between Bryson City and 20 Mile Creek. And then Shuckstack, which sat right above Fontana Dam. It's one of the steepest hikes on the AT, I think, that there is. There's some Shuckstack going down. Brad is laughing about that. Now, here are 3 others that existed but were not staffed. Spruce Knob, which sat on Balsam Mountain Road, which you take to Balsam Mountain Campground now, but it's set between Cataloochee and the South District. And then there was Bunker Hill, which was in the Cage Cove District, way on down below Ace Gap on Parsons Branch Road. And then Blanket Mountain, which did not exist at that time, but there was a fire tower at Blanket Mountain once upon a time. And I was going to, if Charlie were here, I was going to ask him if I'd left any out. There may have been others. Most of these were built by the CCCs, Civilian Conservation Corps. But Mount Camera, I think, was not. It was built by a contractor, I do believe. Now, here are the people that worked those towers. There's stories about each one of them. Look Rock, a fellow named J.R. Buchanan. Those of you that heard Dwight McCarter's presentation last night heard him talking about J.R. Buchanan. He was the shortest ranger employee and I was the tallest. So we have a picture, you know, I'm standing like this, and JR's down here somewhere. And I'm holding the smallest fire tool we had, which was a garden trowel, and he was holding the biggest, big fire rate. So we spread that around. Now at Rich Mountain was a gentleman named Ben Frank, just like the character on one of the animated cartoon shows, Ben Frank. But Ben was a Vietnam vet and a really good lookout. Cold Mountain, Billy Wilson, Fire Control Aide Billy Wilson. I'll tell you a story about him in a minute. Greenbrier Pinnacle was staffed by Shirley Carpenter. Mount Camera, Lenny Garver. He just recently passed away. He was almost as short as JR, but not quite as much. Now, Mount Sterling was Lloyd Caldwell. We called him Sarge Caldwell. Fry Mountain was Ennis Martin. E-N-N-I-S, Ennis Martin. High Rocks and Shuck Stack were staffed by the Cable brothers. Guy Cable was at High Rocks, and Worth, that's his name, Worth, W-R-T-H. Worth Cable was at Shuck Stack. Now, I've told you I would tell you some stories about these fellas. Billy Wilson, how many of you have hiked to the Cascades Falls behind park headquarters? Okay, well, you may not know, that's a Jeep road that goes in front of it, you cross that stream there. Well, that goes another 11 miles to Cold Mountain Fire Tower. And now you can get there by going up to the Ski Lodge Road because there are so many condominiums up there, you don't have to take this route. But we used to have to go that way. But one of the jobs we had to do when you opened it up, especially when you were opening it up for the spring fire season, February, and by the way, the fire seasons in the Great Smokies were October and November, and again, February the 15th to May 15th. Those were the fire seasons. So you were staffing these fire towers in the high country at times when it was warmer on the lower country, but still cold and still ice and snow in the upper country, where the fire towers were. So we had jobs of having, and there was a cabin at each of these places where the lookout had to live during their tour of duty, which but this time was like 5 days, and then somebody would come and relieve them for 2 days. My job was usually to relieve somebody. But what you do when you go there, you open up the cabin, and there's a little utility building right beside it. In some cases, they had electricity that came up so you could work the radios. And Cold Mountain did. And the building was maybe 4x4 building, no light in it, very dark. And you had to go in there and throw the power switch. You had to unlock it first and throw it. So I was in there. That was the job I did. I walked in to throw that switch. And all of a sudden, Billy said, "Joe, back up real slow." And there sat a timberhead rattler. I didn't see the thing, but he did. And so you can bet I backed out slow. And I never saw the snake, but he said he saw it run out. So that was a Billy Wilson story. Lenny Garver, I'll have to tell you this story. I don't think he'll mind a bit. He worked Mount Camera. Those of you that know about Mount Camera, there's 2 stories there. There's the top part where the catwalk is, and there's the bottom part, which is like 1 story down, over on the south side of the tower. Well, Lenny's wife would usually go with him. They didn't have any children, so they didn't have to worry about a babysitter and all. But she would go with him and stay there a lot. And the way Lenny would take a shower is he'd go down to the lower end, and she would pour hot water over the catwalk. Except on one occasion where she was mad at him, it was cold water. And Lenny said those mountains heard some Sunday school words. All right. And Sarge Caldwell at Mount Sterling. He also was in charge of keeping the Jeep trail in good shape. People think that when you had a fire tower job, you spend a lot of time doing nothing. Trust me. If there was nothing going on, it wasn't a high burning day, they were telling you do something like go and take the creosote and paint the steps, or something like that. So you were doing things all the time. And on one occasion, Sarge had taken the Jeep down. He had to repair the Jeep before I made my first trip up there. and he had repaired the Jeep trail. But my first trip up there, I'd never driven a Jeep before on a Jeep road. I mean, there's just enough room to drive, and that's it. I mean, you're gone if you get off the road. And what I did not know back then was I didn't know about granny gear on a Jeep. I thought you had to keep it in high gear, so I would drive up, it would roll back like this, drive up, it would roll back like this. Of course, if you put it in granny gear, it would crawl up a tree. Those of you that know what I'm talking about. But I got off that morning, relieved, and Sarge was going to come up. I said, Lord, Sarge, that Jeep there. He said, yeah, ain't it nice? Before you should have seen it before I fixed it. So that's my Sarge Caldwell story. Now, Ennis Martin, who worked at Fry Mountain, we would check with him. The Rangers on patrol at night would go to Clingman's Dome to Forney Ridge parking area and shine their lights out toward Fry Mountain and blink them. And if Ennis said, I can see you, we knew he was all right. We knew he didn't need any help, you see. He'd get on the radio and say, yeah, I see you. I see them lights are flashing up there. Now, on High Rocks and Chuckstack, Guy Cable and Worth Cable, they had worked these towers a long time before you had what's called an Osborne firefinder. I'm not sure you know what I'm talking about, but it's a big piece of brass with a map on it, and you would rotate it and take a sight on wherever the fire was, all right? And then there would be certain degrees you would read off of that. And then another fire tower would see the same smoke, get a reading, and back at headquarters they were crossing that out on the map. You understand how that worked? Well, there was only 360 numbers on that thing, okay? There was an occasion where a guy called in something like, I've got a reading of 900 degrees. And the dispatcher said, say what, guy? I said 900 degrees. Well, I'm not sure. Listen, I know where the GD fire is. It's down at the Jason White place, but I can't read this thing. All right. And Worth Cable at Chuckstack. How many of you know about ramps? How many of you know what happens when you eat ramps? How your breath is. Okay. I told you now, remember, that when you first started staffing these fire towers, it was cold on top of the mountain. So usually they'd be bundled up with a little fire in the stove. And Worth would make coffee, but he would never change the grounds until the grounds got to the very top of the pot. Then he'd empty it and start all over again. So he'd cook his coffee that way. Well, one morning when I was relieving him for the 2 days, the thing was all locked up and there was frost on the windows, you know. Coffee was boiling, and he'd been eating ramps. Okay? I didn't know that, but the little trap door opens and the guy's sitting right there. So I opened the trap door, he said, morning, Joe. And I nearly fall off the tower, you know. And another time, it was a cold mountain, where I was the first one to the tower that day and it had been locked up. And it was a cold morning where the lock was frozen. And you're standing there trying to unlock that thing, and the wind gets up, and first thing you know, your lunchbox is blowing out over Wares Valley. And my tongue got stuck on the lock because I was trying to get enough hot air in there to unlock it. I was in a fix for a few seconds. All right. So let's see. I mentioned the Guy Cable and Worth Cable story. There was another group of brothers called the Whiteheads. Archie Whitehead, Grady Whitehead, and Ben Whitehead. And they all worked for the park in various roles. Ben and Archie were maintenance employees, and Grady was fire lookout. Now, I wish somebody would give a talk in Wildlife Week about this, but their grandmother was raised in on, let's see, not Ace Gap, but the creek there, Rabbit Creek. Was raised on Rabbit Creek, which was one of the 3 roads you got into Cades Cove. Can anybody name the 3 ways they got in and out of Cades Cove before the roads you know now? Anybody name them? I bet Bill could. I'll go over it. Yes, Brad?
Parsons, Rabbit, and Rich
I forgot about you're right, Parsons Branch. Well, Rich Mountain, Rabbit Creek, and the Cooper Road. The Cooper Road and Rabbit Creek went to Maryville. Parsons Branch, I forgot about that. That came later. And it was not one way at that time. But that was built, let's see, Maryville College. The original Bolt Mountain Road, I'll talk about that in a minute too. Coming up through Schoolhouse Gap and going up what's west prong of Little River and goes within a half a mile of Spence Field, or is it a mile and a half, Roger? I'm not really sure. The Jeep Trail. Okay. Well, Maryville College in the early 1800s commissioned that road to be built, get this, to take the gospel to North Carolina. That was what they said. That's in print. That's in marble somewhere in Maryville College. Well, I'm sidetracking a little bit, that's okay. There's Bolt Mountain, B-O-T-E, and Defeat Ridge. Some of you know where those are. And the road up Bolt Mountain, which we used to go to Spence Field during the Dennis Martin search, was put on Bolt Mountain. You may not know the story. When Maryville College was surveying that road, there were Cherokees with the survey party, and they had surveyed two routes, one on Bolt Mountain and one on what's now Defeat Ridge. And they asked the Cherokees, which do you think is the best ridge to put this road on? They pointed and said, Boat. Well, that meant vote, V-O-T-E. And the other one didn't get the right of way, so it's called Defeat Ridge. That's how those two ridges got their name. Maybe you don't know, but every stream and ridge in the park is named after something that occurred there or some geological phenomenon or topographical phenomenon that went on. And when the maps were made, when this park was first surveyed in the 1930s, there were many creeks that had the same name. So they had to recreate names. And of course, the folks that lived in these places didn't like the fact that the names of their familiar territory had been changed. But it had to be done because of the topo maps that had to be made. I've been told by fellows that made these maps, well, we used to hear stories that there were places in the Great Smokies that no one has ever been. Well, these guys said, trust me, somebody's been over every ridge and up every stream. Because they had to do it to find this information out, to make maps and whatnot. I didn't mention Johnny Ledford. Okay, just trying to be fair to name all these fire tower guys. He was a relief guy like I was. See, the regular lookouts would work the towers for 5 days, stay in the cabin. And the relief person would come up, say Cove Mountain for 2 days, then I'd take the middle day of my tour duty and go to another one like Rich Mountain for the next 2 days. And that's how we did it, you see. I should ask for a sergeant at arms to let me know when we get to within 5 minutes of time to close, because somebody else probably comes in this room, at least within 30 minutes after we do. Back to Big Creek Ranger Station. One of the jobs I had to do, and I loved it, was raise the flag at the flagpole every morning. And usually there was nobody there but myself. I would salute the flag, and it didn't matter if anybody, the critters saw me maybe. But that was nice to be able to do that. It really was. My first supervisor was a ranger named Mark Hanna, H-A-N-N-A-H. He lived in Cataloochee, and he was Cataloochee to me. He was raised there before it was a park, and grew up on, they went to church at what's Palmer's Chapel, those of you that have been there. That was the Methodist church. And Little Cataloochee was the Baptist church. And his wife came from Little Cataloochee. Her last name was Messer, M-E-S-S-E-R. But anyway, I learned how to track and how to listen for dogs that were running in the park illegally, and how to know, how to know so much about the job I'd inherited. And these fellows, understand, had been in the park before it was a park. And the young rangers these days do wonderful jobs, but they don't have that privilege now. See, I had the privilege to work with the people who lived here, and I'm thankful for that. And I treasure it, I really do. That's why I enjoy doing this kind of thing, so I can share maybe with them or with others the things they taught me. But I want to tell you about Mark, a story or two. There's all kind. One of the things I regret when I prepare these stories is I never have enough time to do what I'd like to do, to tell you what I'd like to tell you. But one of the things we had to do, each ranger station had a gravity flow water supply. Oh, there was this reservoir, concrete block reservoir, up a creek above the ranger station. And you had gravity flow water coming to your house. And by the way, we were required to live in a ranger residence. We had to pay rent, but we were required to live there. These days, they're not required to live in the park. I understand that, and that's a good thing. But we were, because you were never off duty. You were never off duty. Well, let's go back to this water system. Mark said, we've got something to do up here at my water supply, so I'm going to show you how I want you to do this. And you do the same thing at yours. So we walk up 2 miles up the creek, and there was a little box there with a lock on it, which he unlocked it. It had a notebook and some tablets of something that was supposed to purify the water. He said, what I want you to do is you come up here once a week when I'm off duty and open that thing, take the 2 tablets out and drop them on the ground. I don't want any of this stuff in my water. So I put it in my water. But often you'd find you didn't have any water pressure. So you'd go to the reservoir and there was sometimes a squirrel blocking it, sometimes a salamander or several of them. So that's what you drank. There never was enough water pressure for a shower, anything like that. And at Big Creek, there was no telephone, just the radio on the truck, which I had to wire inside the house, put a speaker in there. So when they called me at night, I had to go to the truck, crank it up, and answer them that way. You see. And one night, it was at 2 in the morning. The dispatcher called, and my wife said, I wonder what they want, something bad going on. Okay. Well, I went out, cranked the truck, that took 10 minutes. And the dispatcher said, just checking the radio, wanted to make sure it was working. But more often than not, something was going on. We didn't not have the little portable radios then. Well, they had 1 or 2, but understand they weighed maybe 50 pounds. And you had 50 pounds of batteries you had to carry with it. And the way those things work, you had to stop somewhere. Maybe each one of those fire roads had a runaround to the top. And there was a wire hanging there where you could hook it to the radio. But if you was some other place, you had to stop and throw a wire over a tree to be able to broadcast to anybody. You could monitor, but you couldn't talk unless that antenna was up there like that. There might be some technicians in this room that I know what I'm talking about. But it was an occasion where Ranger Frank Oliver, that I wish I had more time to talk about Frank. He was a grandson of John Oliver of Cates Cove. But Frank was one of those fellows that taught me so much. But he was a person of few words. But there was an occasion where he and I were hunting for a plane crash. Well, we found the thing. It was one of those in Cataloochee. And we had very little daylight. And we had the body bags and that sort of thing. But we had it, and he said, okay, boy, we've got enough time to get out of here before dark. I said, call and check in, tell them, on the radio. So I had to throw the wire over like that. I did that, and then took it down and started getting ready to leave. And then headquarters called and says, the superintendent wants to talk to you. Frank said, I wonder what the such and such he wants. So I had to get out and throw the wire over the tree, 30 minutes, And Frank said, well, we won't get out here by dark now. So I said, yes, sir, we're here, what you need? And the dispatcher said, well, the superintendent was in there, in the radio, and he said, Frank, I need to know in what direction the plane was flying when it crashed. Frank said, give me that microphone. Straight down, by God, which way did you think it was going? We won't get out here by dark now, crazy fool. Ask me a question like that. But another Frank story, I learned tracking, I mentioned, from Mark Hanna and also from Frank. There was a grandfather and 2 of his grandchildren lost. They were teenage grandchildren. So we weren't that worried that they probably were not going to be okay somewhere, because there's 3 of them. And Frank knew that this gentleman was an old CCC trails foreman. So he said, what he's done, boy, he's gone down one of these old trails that he helped build that's probably not marked right now. Okay, fine. So we go along and check each one of those that Frank knew about. This is walking the AT, places where the trails are taking off. And in one spot, one of the old trails that went down to the Fontana Lake, Frank, I think maybe 5 minutes went by, and I thought it was 5 hours, you know. I said, well, Frank, how long will we be here? Shut up, boy. There's something going on here. I just ain't figured it out yet. All right. Well, what he had, he said, okay, look here. He said, right here, just around the curve of this trail, there's a group of monarch butterflies circled. He said, down the trail a little further, there's a group halfway up. The trails, as you know, have a cut side and a fill side. The sides you cut the dirt from and the sides you fill up. One's steep and one's drop off. And the cut side is where these butterflies were. And Frank said, okay, and here's another pile down here halfway up. This one was high. And the third one, around out of sight, was in the middle of the trail. He said, right here is where night overtook them. Well, how do you know? Okay. He said, they stopped to urinate. And this is the young man, the high one on the bank. This is the old man. And that's the young lady around that's in the trail. They've gone down this trail, you'll find them at Fontana Lake. Well, we radioed in, and that's where they were. Right down near Pony Ridge or somewhere. So that's tracking as an art. That is tracking as an art. There are many more Ranger Frank stories. I'll try to go on to some others here. But another old gentleman named Jerry Mernon, who had retired from Yellowstone, but he was here actually he hadn't retired yet. He was here as a consultant for the Rangers in his final years before retirement. But he had broken in the 1920s with Horace Albright being superintendent. How many of you have seen Ken Burns' presentation on Park Service? Well, he refers to Horace Albright and Stephen Mather, and he did his homework very well. Because Horace Albright wrote a letter to all young Rangers applicants, and it was harsh. He says, if you can't do this, don't apply. If you can't do that, don't apply. And these gentlemen I worked for had broken in with Rangers that had been broken in that way. Okay? So Jerry Mernon was one of those Rangers who started in Yellowstone as a youngster. And he was in his 60s just before retirement. And he told me, boy, what you want to do. I was boy. I was always called boy. You know? Boy, what you want to do is arrest the offense. He says, don't worry about arresting the offender unless it's necessary. Like if they're drunk or something like that. But try to arrest the offense. If you're in a picnic area and somebody throws a hot dog wrapper on the ground, go by and pick it up, wink at them, and put it in the garbage can. And you've arrested the offense. Okay, another story he told me that I'll share with you. And he was a young ranger in Yellowstone. Back then, they had the buffalo stampede they would do once every 2 or 3 months in front of a grandstand of people. Of course, it took 2 weeks worth of hard riding on horses to get these buffalo rounded up and corralled. Hard work, all the daylight hours, okay? And the Secretary of the Interior was coming to see this. So they went to extra special work and got maybe more buffalo, 3 weeks worth of riding, and put them in the corral. And the Secretary was there, along with the superintendent. So they did the stampede. And the superintendent called Jerry up, said, the Secretary wants to see it again. Jerry said, well, tell that SOB he can come and ride with us to get it done. So that was how Jerry broke in. Now, I mentioned to you we lived in 30 different places. I've got a couple of examples here of what it was like in those days to move. One, Mel Tillis said this. I wish it were my credit, but it's not. Mel Tillis said, when you're a young couple and you have to move, all you have to do is put out the fire and call the dogs. All right. I've had a question or two. How am I doing on time, folks? Okay. What was your first month or two like as a ranger? And I use an example President Carter gave in a talk he gave because it fits so well. He said, well, they asked him what was his first 100 days like. He said, what it was like, the old man that was called before a judge and had been charged with being drunk and setting a bed on fire. Okay, and the judge said, well, sir, how do you plead to this charge? So he said, well, Your Honor, I'll admit to being drunk, but the bed was on fire when I got in it. All right. I'll have to tell you the Joe Bad, Joe Good story. I was called one day before the corner office in the Smoky, that's the superintendent's office. And you didn't like the thought of being called into the corner office. So they told me, well, one day the superintendent needs to see you. Be here at 8 o'clock, be in full dress uniform. Okay. So I knew my name was either Joe Bad or Joe Good. I was afraid it was going to be Joseph Bad. When I got in there, he said, Kelly, I've got a control correspondence on you here. Well, I'll tell you what that is in just a minute. But what I had done, 441 was closed for snow and ice. And I had to work the sign. There at Sugar Land Visitor Center, there's a sign that says, do not go beyond this point without chains. Okay, that was my job, to stop people. And I was standing there, here comes a car the other way, coming from North Carolina. Okay, so I stop him, and the guy says, there was a car blocking the sign on the other side. I said, sir, what sign are you talking about? So you saw it. You knew it was there. Yeah. Well, sir, I'm sorry, I've got to give you a ticket. Look, boy, I know the Secretary of the Interior. Well, in that case, you won't have any trouble with this ticket. That's all I said. That's all I said. Okay, that's what the control correspondence was all about. He thought I had been smart to him, you see. And the letter came, control correspondence means a government letter coming from a congressman or a senator that the superintendent has to answer. And Senator Charles Percy had sent the letter saying, one of my constituents is upset with one of your rangers. Okay, so I explained it, and Kelly's superintendent said, well, Kelly, I defended you. But now if I find out you've done wrong, I'm going to lay down the articles of war. I never heard another thing from it, so I guess I was Joe Good. All right, let's see. I'm like I mentioned, I've got so many notes, and I won't get to all of them, but I'm going to make mention here of one or two others. I said this Wednesday, but I'm going to say it again now. How many of you remember what I said about a ranger's primary job? Bill remembers. The primary job of a National Park Ranger is safeguarding of human life. That's the number one flag you salute on the pole. That's probably true of most any law enforcement agency, wouldn't you not say? I hope that's the case. Now the job description, when you get beyond that, and Mr. Dieter here has this in his presentation, you protect the park from the people from the park, and the people from each other. That's what you do.
Preserve natural resources.
The Act of 1960. Okay. And this is the 100th anniversary, which Mr. Bill Dieter back there has a program about. This is the 100th anniversary of the Act of 1960. And what it primarily says is to save the national resources for the enjoyment of future generations, but you don't do it by destroying them. Back then we had 3 management books. The green book, the red book, and the blue book. The green book was all the natural areas like Great Smokies, Yellowstone, Yosemite. The red book was the historical areas, Civil War battlefields, Revolutionary, the Native American monuments in the Southwest. And the blue book was recreational areas. At that time there weren't that many. Cape Hatteras, what is it in New Jersey? I can't even think now. Up Martha's Vineyard and in there. Anyway, the national seashores. And now there's new ones. Two of those are Golden Gate in San Francisco and Gateway in New York City. And now there's a lot more descriptions of different types of national parks. But remember this, any national park with that definition is established by an act of Congress and nothing less than that. Now the president can determine some area is a national monument. The president can declare that, like this is a national monument, and no other action is required. And there's other descriptions now, good gracious, a couple of dozen of different types of areas, national rivers, national parkways, and the Blue Ridge Parkway is exactly that. And the founding legislation of the Blue Ridge Parkway, get this, is to provide a motor recreational roadway between Shenandoah and Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's its primary legislation, right there. A lot of big natural areas are fee areas. Great Smokies, well, two things have got to happen before this ever becomes a fee area. I mean, talking about an admission fee. They have user fees for camping and such, but the entrance fee is what I'm talking about. Anybody have an idea what those two reasons would, what two things would have to happen before the Smokies could become a fee area? The state legislatures of Tennessee and North Carolina have to say so, have to approve such a thing, both of them. Otherwise, this park can, that's what Mr. Rockefeller said when he gave the $5 million to buy lands, that was a stipulation he wanted, that a fee will never be charged without action by the two state legislatures. Joe, are we okay on time, my brother? Okay, all right. Let's see. What I think I'll do now, I want to make mention of some of the things that these old-time Rangers said. These are, back then, I mean, they were in my age now, and I understand now why they were so cantankerous. But some of the things they said, I've told you what Frank said about the plane crash, and there's a couple of more things. I told you what Jerry Moonen said about the thing in Yellowstone. But now, Ranger Audley Whaley, who was here he was in Cosby at the time. He was another one of my marble statues, if you will, my mentors, chief mentors. He, along with my supervisor, taught me a lot about the area where I was working. And on one occasion, I've got two things to talk about to him, but on one, he pulled up to the ranger station to get me, my ranger station, and that day the maintenance were putting in the picnic table. Now he might have heard, he said this to me, he might have heard it somewhere else, so I'm not going to let him claim originality for it, but this is what he said. I got in the truck and said, now look at that, boy, look at there. In my day, you ate in the house and the bathroom was in the yard. Now, by George, you eat in the yard, the bathroom's in the house. That was something along the order of what he said. He said, don't talk to me about progress. All right. Now, Tennessee Highway 32 that goes from Cosby around, before I-40, that's the way you went to Big Creek. It stops at Davenport Gap, and that's North Carolina. Well, there are many bridges, creeks that come down out of the park, because the one side of the road is the park boundary through there. And Audley and I were riding, and I was driving. He was sitting on this side. And he said, stop the truck, boy. Back up. Get on that bridge. He said, listen, we heard this buck, 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 buck. It was a John Deere one-lung engine. It was under the bridge. And Audley said, we ought to check this out. We went down, and it was a water pump. And there was a rubber hose running from there across to another ridge, to a dry holler. Okay? All right? Audley said, boy, there's a still up there. We're going up there to check it out. We are? Yes, we are. Okay. We walk up, and we get there, and I'm thinking my life's over, you know. And I see the smoke coming from the thing. We got there, and nobody was around it. Not a soul. They may have been off in the woods, I don't know. But nobody was around it. And Audley said, I know who this is. I know exactly who this is. Get your little notebook out of your pocket and write a note. I'll be back at 2 o'clock tomorrow and sign it Audley. I did that. He said, and you're coming with, I am? You know, oh my gosh. So I was counting my life again that night, right? We went back the next day, and here sat a grandfather and his sons running the still, and all the children running around. Audley, you ain't seen you in 2 years. We're so glad you wanted to visit with us. Audley said, all I want you to do is get this out of the park. Oh, okay. Well, you come back tomorrow, and it'll be gone, and bring this boy here with you. So that's an Audley story. Let's see, I'm just picking these out. When Frank Oliver passed away, he's buried here at Pigeon Forge, at the cemetery up behind Connor Heights. And we had dress uniforms on, summertime, so we had the straw hats on. And we had a line that were going to carry the casket down through the line. And we were there, and that was going on, so we couldn't stop. And it started raining, and I had thought to put my plastic cover on my hat. Well, Chief Lee had not. Okay, and it starts raining, and his Stetson starts flopping down over his eyes like that. And before Frank got up there, his body, I looked over and said, I guess into every life a little rain must fall. He looked at me and said, any more dad blame weather reports? All right. Now, all right. Another ranger, and this fellow had transferred from the West. His name was Warren Rigby. Wonderful fellow. A Utah Mormon. I mean, I learned a lot about those folks from him, and that's okay. We were on a fire here, which was on the side of a rocky bluff, and you had to almost do technical climbing to get up to where the fire was burning in the rocks. And he had just come here from Yosemite. And so when we got through, taking a break, breathing hard, sitting down, trying to get a breath, I said, well, Warren, I guess this doesn't compare much with the western parts. He said, Joe, you can only go straight up so far. All right. Now, Earl Ogle, I've got to talk about him a little bit. Earl Ogle, who became the postmaster at Gatlinburg, had a job as a seasonal part-time ranger at Newfound Gap, back when the kiosk was there. That's a little building, but not much bigger than this. You had to stand in it and answer questions. So you had enough room to turn around. That was about it. And there was a sign up here that said elevation, 5,048 feet. Okay. A gentleman comes up, and Earl was the guy that if you ask him a smart-aleck question, he'd give you a smart-aleck answer. And this guy comes up, well, how do you know it's 5,048 feet? Earl said, okay, fella. He said, well, here's what we do. We hired a drilling rig to come up here, and we drilled a hole until we hit salt water, and we measured the hole. And it was 5,048 feet. Where's that hole? Well, that garbage can there is over it. I was with him on another occasion where a fellow he had to have some work done on his car. All right? And I said, well, now where's a good garage in Gatlinburg? Well, so we can't really recommend one over the other. Well, where do you go? Well, I go to McCarter's 66. What makes them so special? He's pushing him. Well, I'll tell you what, come here. He said, they've got the Phillips head screwdriver down there. Said, them other boys have only went to Flathead School. Now, at Newfound Gap, this happened back before my day, but everybody knew there was a Trailways bus that went, maybe I say everybody, you may know, there's a Trailways bus that went through at 6 in the morning, going to North Carolina, came back at 6 at night. And worked that key at the ranger's office was a stall in the men's room. I mean, you went in there and you sat down on the only seat there was, and you unlocked this little box, and your notebook and notepaper were in there. So that's what you had to do. He got off the bus at 6 o'clock in the morning, worked that kiosk until 6 at night, and got the bus back. And he said that on occasions, I'd be in there doing paperwork maybe 30 minutes. He'd come out and people say, that ranger has a problem. All right. George, how much time do we have? Tell you what I want to do at this point. I want to take questions because I really relish the questions, I really do. And the most important answer I can give you as a ranger is I don't know. I don't need to bluff. I don't need to make it up. That has happened too many times. But that's what I will tell you exactly. And I may try to find the answer out for you if you're going to be around where I can give it to you. But are there questions you'd like to ask me? I would welcome any. All right, sir.
What kind of education you had before you got the job?
Well, my college major was philosophy, so that didn't count. Back in my day, you had to be like a forestry major to count, to qualify academically. So I had to work 7 years as a part-time before they would consider me. But it's turned out my people skills training helped me more than any resource training would have. Because 90% of your job is with people and 10% with the resource. Back then. Now I think they have more specialties. That's great. You have the backcountry folks, the highway patrol folks. That's a good thing. And these young men and women do a wonderful job today. They really do. But back, they're not the generalists like we had to be. Did that answer for you? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
The memories that you have, did you write those all through the years, or did you think them up, remember them?
I wrote these down. Well, at first I wrote them down because I thought, how cantankerous these guys are. But I realize now it's philosophy. And I wrote them down in diaries. We had to keep diaries. We had to keep red book diaries. And that's where all of them are. And it's everything from weather reports to whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I just wondered what the early homes, houses you lived in as rangers were like.
What were the, okay, I'm sorry, I should be repeating the questions. What were the early homes that we lived in as rangers? The Big Creek Ranger Station was an old Crestmont Lumber Company home built in 1905. And whenever headquarters would paint a building and they had paint left, they'd bring it to our station to paint it inside. And our rent was based on the nearest town and the equivalent house in that town would have rented. And the bears would walk around the porch at night. We had a 3-sided porch. And sure enough, the bears would walk around there. And there was one morning where there was a copperhead wrapped around the base of the commode. And by going to the toilet, it hasn't been the same since. Okay. There were others, what they call Mission 66 homes. You see, in the 50s, the director of the Park Service had a program he set up called Mission 66 because it was known, as Bill Dieter knows, the parks didn't have the facilities to handle the number of visitors that were coming then. They were increasing. So he wanted to have better visitor centers, better restrooms, and ranger homes were built as Mission 66 homes. And we lived in a couple of those. One here at Tremont Ranger Station in the Smokies, one on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and let's see, one other in Everglades. One other in Everglades. So that's a general summary of how we lived. Did I see a hand over here? Yes, Bill?
When you made your career choice, did you consider other things? I mean, for instance, the Forest Service versus the National...
Well, when I went to Carson Newman College, I was going there to be a minister. My curriculum was theology and philosophy. But I found out the Lord had another pulpit in mind for me. It was a stump in the woods. Put my knee. Jerry Mernon, he said, the only desk a ranger should ever need is a stump in the woods. And you put your knee on that and write on your little notebook on your knee. Did I see a question? Yes, sir.
You mentioned about the poisonous snakes a couple times. How many times were there people bitten?
In the Smokies, very
Yeah,
few.
was
A lot of non-poison snake bites. The biggest injury we had was foot injuries, sprained ankles, maybe broken. No, I take that back. It was bee stings and wasp stings, because most of the folks that got that were allergic to it didn't know that. They found out they were allergic to insect bait, and we were allowed back then to carry epinephrine. You can't do that now unless you're an EMT. But we were allowed to use it, but a whole lot of insect bites. So that was the number one, and next was sprained ankles, feet. You had to just about try to get snake bitten. You had to walk through grass, knee-high, barefooted, something like that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a story the other day about a suicide incident just below the chimneys.
Yes.
I'm curious, is that the area that they refer to as the Civil War site, Fort Harry?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell that story. Fort Harry, if you drive up 441 and you go past the chimneys picnic area and there's a big switchback, and before you get to the first tunnel, there's a paved parking lot on the left. That used to be the Buckeye Nature Trail. That trail goes around the parking lot and you can see down to the parking lot from any point on that trail. It was a lovely trail. It's still there, but it's not marked. I guess it was not really that safe or something, I don't know. But one night at 10 o'clock on night patrol, there was a car parked there, this 63 Chevy, I think it was. And there was a note taped to the steering wheel. And the door was open, so the dome light was on. You could see it. So I'll go up and look at the note. It says, "Dear Ranger, before you finish reading this, you and I'll be dead." And I heard a gunshot go off on the trail. I thought, well, I knew I'd been shot. But what he did, he killed himself. He chickened out on shooting me. So that's another one I take to bed every night. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of emotional luggage with this. The Dennis Martin search, I still carry that one because Dennis was the same age as my oldest boy at the time, 7 years old. So I go to sleep with that one every night. And the job cost me a couple of ulcers and a heart attack, but I would do it again. I would do it again. Rosemary?
You have said that your wife and kids, in essence, became ranger assistants.
Oh, yes.
If there was ever an incident, would the Park Service have supported them?
That's a good question.
Or criticized you for letting them do your job?
I'm going to give you the answer. I don't know. Julia wrote 10 times the number of backcountry permits that I did because she was home a lot. Well, she taught school for 40 years also, but she never got a check for all that ranger work she did. And there were times where she was home by herself and the boys, well, Kevin wasn't born then, but Travis Nelson was in school, and which was a 40-mile ride on Interstate 40 to Maggie Valley from Big Creek. We had a radio in the house that would, every now and then you'd hear the squelch mark, like that. And it would do that maybe every 5 minutes. All right? If there was more than one occasion where a suspicious male would come to the door, he was trying to find out if anybody else was home, you see. And on one of these occasions, that radio did like that. Zzz. She said, "One of you boys answer that radio." The guy left, So she had all these little tricks, you see. 5 minutes? 3 minutes. Okay. Kathy?
You want to say that there was a peeping Tom incident and
That was on the Blue Ridge.
you and the boys chased after the.
I'll tell that briefly.
Did you ever catch him?
Yes. I'll talk about that, but I can't give details about it. I'll tell you the reason why. But in one of the Mission 66 homes on Blue Ridge, my oldest boy Nelson and his cousin Mark, who were teenagers, were there in the front living room. And Julia was in the back undressed. And she said, "Joe, there's a man looking at me through the back window." So I run out and I said, "Boys, we got to catch somebody. There might be a fight." So when I got out the door, and they were right behind me, one had a broom handle and one had a mop. And I told Julia, I said, "Go ahead and call the rescue squad, because if I catch this fella, one of the two of us is going to need a ride." And yes, he was caught, but he was an employee, and a minority employee, and that's all I can say about it, because it takes an act of Congress from that point. And yes,
What was your favorite assignment or your favorite location that you served?
most rangers will answer that by saying the first park. There's a phenomenon called the love of first park. I like them all, but I like the Smokies, of course, and the Blue Ridge. I ended up being chief ranger on the Blue Ridge, and trust me, it wasn't as much fun as being able to be in the resource, working with the people. Being behind the desk wasn't that much fun.
Your son was something, I think he liked the American Reds.
The Everglades, like I mentioned, I was not a sailor. You know, did I mention how the 14-foot boat, 7-foot Ranger and 8-foot seas? Something wrong with that. But I was glad to know there were people there that did like it and that protected it and keep it the way it's supposed to be. That's good.
What were your biggest stressors, Joe, that, as you said, you took a physical and mental toll?
Closing the Blue Ridge Parkway doing ice storms, because you didn't know when you were going off the road. You know, that was my big, because you were doing that for 30 minutes. Now, if you had an accident or something, you knew it was going to be bad, the time before you got there was bad because you're thinking about it. But when you get there, your training took over. You know, everything was automatic then. So that was all right. But the getting to it was not fun at all. Roger?
Joe, did you say that the Bunker Hill Fire Tower wasn't manned?
It was not staffed in my day. The Whiteheads were the last ones there. It was there. I went to it a time or two, but it was not staffed. Look Rock they felt Look Rock could cover that. In later years, the reason the fire towers don't exist, you had aerial detection, which was cheaper. Because the U.S. Forest Service had a contract with us, and they could get the entire Tennessee, North Carolina state line in one flight. One employee, one pilot and one observer. That was cheaper than 15 fire towers. You see, and the staff and the staying there and all that. Folks, I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pardon me?
Ranger's Ranger.
Yes, well, thank you. I guess, I don't know if we're still on the air or not, so folks don't say anything. Don't say anything you'll have to add, talk to 911 about.
That's civil service, John Joe, or is it general?
It's well, the superintendents are now not civil service. But back then, every job was. I don't know now which ones are general services, which ones are civil service. My day, everybody was civil service. Yeah, I was a GS3 to start with. That meant $3,000 a year. That was great, though.
Dad was here this morning.
Well, yeah, yeah. I know the time. I know the time well. But you know, I've been working here at the hotels in Gatlinburg, which is a whole lot better. I mean, that was a whole lot better than what they were doing.
I'm a forest ranger from New York.
Are you, sir?
I'm retired now.